Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the role of formative assessment in designing and refining long-term professional development. Today is April 22nd, 2015, and I'm your host, Pat Fox from the National Writing Project. Tonight we're talking with leaders from 3 National Writing Project sites who've been leading year-long professional development with their high-needs partner schools. If you're joining us on the webinar program page, where in addition to finding the audio and video of this Google Hangout on Air, you can also find a collection of resources that our presenters have shared generously, several of which they'll be referring to during the course of the webinar. The Hangout itself will be posted at the end of tonight's session, and it and the resources will continue to be available after tonight on demand. You'll also notice a link to an interactive agenda for tonight's webinar where, if you're listening to us live, we invite you to post comments and questions that we'll pass along to the presenters. So welcome, everyone, and let's get started. Before we bring in our guests, I wanted to offer a brief history and a context of this work. In its 40-year history, the National Writing Project has always prioritized extending the reach of its programs to serve high-needs schools. In the past several years, funded in part by supporting effective educator seed grants from the U.S. Department of Education and a variety of other funding sources, NWP sites across the country have been engaged in developing school and district partnerships and leading year-long embedded professional development programs in high-needs elementary, middle, and high schools, all focused on the teaching of writing as part of challenging college and career-ready standards. So at this moment, as many NWP sites are immersed in these year-long school partnerships, we're fortunate to be joined today by colleagues from 3 sites, all of whom bring site leaders with broad experience in this work to share what they've learned and are learning from their intensive professional development programs about the essential elements of successful partnerships. That is, partnerships that have had a measurable positive impact on classroom teaching practice and student performance. We've invited this group of leaders whose work runs across whose work runs the common thread of calling upon a variety of formative assessment strategies and resources that are a constant throughout their work, both in the initial design and in the continuing refinement of their professional development programs. Individually and together, they'll share their formative assessment strategies, resources, and program designs, as well as insights into the ways in which critical feedback from teachers reflecting on their practice and the close reading of student work helps to shape and reshape professional development sessions to meet the needs of teachers and students. So just to say what we've all been thoughtful about in terms of this notion of formative assessment. It assumes a dialogue. It assumes that in our work with students and our work with our teacher colleagues in these partnerships, that we're in constant conversation, and that feedback from the ground of classrooms and from the evidence of student work helps us shape and reshape the work as we go along. So highly interactive, and you'll hear the terms collaboration and co-creation, I think, throughout the work that you're about to hear about. I'm always reminded of Kathy Yancey's term when she did classroom research to see her students as critical co-investigators. And I think you'll hear this thread of inquiry and research, and you'll see very much that teachers and students, by virtue of their work, are engaged as critical co-investigators in this work. So with that in mind, I'm pleased to welcome Erin Mohr and Stephanie Rollag from the Minnesota Writing Project at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, Catherine Quick, Jennifer Guerra, and Maria Garcia from the Coastal Bend Writing Project at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi, Texas, and Toby Kahn-Loftus and Dan Polleys from Top of the Mitt Writing Project at North Central Michigan College in Petoskey, Michigan, where I understand that it is still snowing. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us. Nice to meet everybody.
So to get us started, can we bring in Erin and Stephanie here to tell us about your partnership work in Minneapolis? Stephanie, I understand that you've been working with an interesting partner school, the New Millennium Academy.
Yeah, that's right, Pat. We actually did an in-service with them once in the 2013-14 school year, and they were interested in working with us again. So we decided to work with New Millennium Academy in Minneapolis for this year-long project. And it's a school that is about 97% made up of Hmong students. Of those students, I believe 85% of them are English language learning students, and about 75% are free and reduced students. So it's a really interesting school that draws on literacy and culture in lots of different ways. So we're excited to work with them.
That's great, and it does sound like a fascinating school population. Can you tell us a bit about how you got started with the work?
Yeah, you know, Erin and I went to the school in August to really meet all of the teachers and introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about the writing project and the work that we do. And from there, we sent out a Google form where we asked teachers to fill out the form and give us some information about what kind of professional development they've had in writing, what they were interested in learning more about, and where they really wanted to improve in their instruction around writing. So that was the first thing that we did. And I believe that Google form is attached on the interactive document as well.
Yes, you should all be able to find that on the webinar homepage.
Let's see, from there, Erin, did you want to talk about what we did next?
Sure. So the survey was drafted kind of with information that we knew the school had or had access to. So the questions were kind of closed questions. They offered some choices. We knew that they were SIOP trained. We knew they'd had some exposure to the writing process, and we just wanted to get a feel for where teachers' comfort level was with in each of those areas. And we learned three main things from that survey: that the teachers really wanted resources. They really wanted things that they could pull on, texts, demonstrations. They really kind of, that was an area that they identified. That everybody had a little bit of dedicated writing time in the day or in the week. So it was different at different grade levels, but they all had some kind of time devoted to writing in their instruction. And that they wanted to build the writing confidence and the skills of their students. And they talked a lot about the writing confidence of their students. This is a school that's predominantly EL. Sometimes they talked a lot about they would give students the paper and pencil and then they would sit. And so they wanted to build that confidence and fluency of their students. So we built a calendar with these themes in mind at the beginning, and that can be found on our wiki, which is another resource that is linked in the final document. In the first session with the teachers, we shared the results of that survey. We said, this is what you guys said you wanted. Tell us if we're wrong. And then we also worked with them to create norms. Steph and I come from, we co-taught together in 7th grade language arts, not when we were in 7th grade, but as 7th grade language arts teachers. And so we had a really reflective relationship. We were constantly saying what went well with that, what didn't go well. And we had also worked together in professional development at the school that we taught together in. And so this idea of building norms and a common set of expectations for everybody was really important to us. So we spent most of our time that first session focusing on these survey results, and this is what you said you wanted, and now let's build some norms.
Yeah. So from there, our first big meeting after that was about establishing those norms. And we set the stage by using a framework that I actually got from one of my professors, Tim Lensmeyer, who talked about the difference between having a conversation as a group and a debate. And I think that's shared with the resources as well, but we really wanted to think about, or the teachers to think about how we have a conversation in this space. And then we asked them to think about 3 questions. How do we want to communicate with each other in this space? What do we want to do with our time? What are our goals? And what are we always working toward? And we had the teachers think about and answer those questions, and then we wrote up those answers, and we kept going back to those throughout our professional development throughout the year, which I think just allowed us to start in a place of really understanding where we were at and that this was a collaborative process. You know, and looking at the list of goals that they wanted to achieve that we brainstormed in that session, the teachers as a whole really expressed 3 main things that were connected to some of the things that Erin said, but also that within the professional development they would focus on their own writing, that they would find ways to get their students to enjoy writing, and then also that there would be time in the workshops where they would see demonstrations and then also think about how they could bring that back to their own classroom.
We felt really strongly that this was time for them. So we had ideas about what, you know, based on the feedback that we got about what they might want to learn about, but it's also their time. So anything we bring to them, we want to make sure they have time to practice and rehearse and talk with each other about. As we all know, teachers don't have a lot of time. So anytime we can build that in, we tried to.
It's so clear that the teachers had a hand in shaping the program. I wonder, I just wonder what their reaction was to being invited up front to shape this. And yeah, I'm curious to know what kind of feedback you got from them about the process.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that for one, that just showed, and they were really engaged in the process. They were engaged in the professional development. They were engaged in coming to, you know, they were there Wednesday mornings before school and a lot of Saturday mornings, and I think that shows that they felt like it was important, that it was connected. It also shows, you know, the kind of teachers that we were working with, but I think that because they felt like they had a say in it, it was meaningful to them and something that they were very purposeful about incorporating.
And once I think they realized, too, that we were responding to what they were saying, you know, that's part of that building trust and relationship with the teachers so that they know that we really do, that this is not our show, it's really their show.
So you also invited them to look at, you introduced mentor texts, and you invited them to look closely at student work to decide what your focus for your mini lessons was going to be. So how did the second semester start off?
You know, we really were continuing with a lot of, as we said, this kind of ongoing feedback. So really, as we saw the teachers interacting at different sessions, at different writing project events and with our work, from there we would continue to shift what was happening within the writing group. So just a couple of examples. At one of the conversations that we had with the teachers, somebody said, you know, we really need to know how this modeling is going to look in my classroom. We can read about it in this book, we can talk about it, but I want to see it done. So we brought in a teacher consultant from the Minnesota Writing Project who we knew was doing this in our classroom regularly, and she gave a demonstration lesson that was really effective to meet that need. Another time, the teachers were involved in a connected learning session that we had at the Minnesota Writing Project with the Department of Ed, where we were using technology to think about production. And one of the teachers said, you know, there's so much out there, I just don't know where to start with the digital tools that are available at our school. So Erin and I then each, you know, really focused in on 2 different resources, and we modeled how to use those, how to find those resources, and how to make them work for their lessons, and then gave them time to think about if that was a good fit for them, and if it wasn't, what another good fit might be.
You know, and I've noticed that you have a wealth of inquiry questions to engage them in. I don't know if you were deliberate in naming the process of co-creating and collaborating as an inquiry process, but it seems to me that the work was moved forward on the basis of inviting teachers to be reflective. You know, I recall some of the prompts that you shared at the DOE session. What do you see? How does it connect with your teaching? How does it shift your thinking? What do you think the next step should be? Were you overt in engaging them in inquiry, or were the questions just part and parcel of the fabric of the way you worked?
Well, we built that in, so that often came up during that reflection time, where the teachers would have, you know, the Saturday sessions ranged anywhere from 3.5 to, one of them was 6 hours long, and so at the end of 6 hours, they have 35 minutes here. We're not gonna sit down and, you know, build massive lessons at that point. We really need to digest. We really need to digest what's happened and talk about it. So teachers, we would start with a question, maybe like, how does this connect with your teaching, or connected back to the content. And then as teachers would talk, one or both of us would take notes about what they were saying. And then from that, we were both trained in this, in our previous district in cognitive coaching, which is really about listening and paraphrasing with people, and then asking a question to get at the next step in their thinking. So all the questions that we asked in those reflection sessions were really based on what we heard the teachers were saying. And it was in part to get them engaged in that reflection process, and it was also part data collection for us. What do we do with it now? So we heard them say all these things. What do we need to pull either in a demo or in a resource or look up in one of those texts that we bought to support them the next time that we see them?
Well, thank you. And let me point out again that that you've been generous in sharing many of these resources on the webinar homepage. So folks, either if you're listening to this live, there they are, and if you're listening on demand, those will remain there for you to look through them. And so this seems like a good moment to bring in our colleagues from Texas, for whom I'm sure much of what we've been hearing sounds familiar. So can I ask Catherine, can you start off by telling us a bit about your partner school?
Okay, we're trying to fit 3 people on a screen, so we'll turn it back and forth to the person who's talking here. Our partner school is Wilson Elementary in Corpus Christi, Texas. It's a PK through 5 elementary school with around 500 to 600 students, 70% on free and reduced price lunch. They're a school that has been involved in a lot of initiatives recently with a lot of interest in both writing and STEM. And so we began working with them with this idea of helping them to develop a writing across the curriculum program for their school so that they could incorporate these initiatives.
Great. That that's helpful to have as background. I also understand from our earlier conversation that much of your approach to the work this year with Wilson has actually been informed by lessons that you took away from an earlier long-term professional development partnership. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We worked with Collegiate High School, which is an early college high school here in Corpus that works mostly with first-generation low-income students. When we worked with Collegiate High School, we've had an ongoing relationship with them for several years, and so we pretty much automatically had administrator and teacher buy-in with what we wanted to do. They wanted a writing across the curriculum program, and we stepped in mostly to just facilitate their process. And much like in Erin and Stephanie's situation, we recognized very quickly that importance of teacher reflection for them to think about what they're already doing and where they wanted to go with that. And so we built the professional development program around that process. With Wilson, we did not have the same advantage of that connection. And so we sort of had to figure out how to get that administrator and teacher buy-in, because it seems to be very crucial to this whole process.
To say the least.
Yes. Okay, I'll turn it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit more about how we began the partnership.
Okay, when we initially set things up with the school, we go in and we meet with the instructors and do a teacher survey that they hand back to us. It was usually done on paper, just to get an idea of their program and where they think it is. One of the things that we found was overall they felt like not a lot of writing was done in their school, there wasn't a lot of consistency, and that writing across the curriculum was not a strength. One of the things that we do after that is we put together, it's a much larger sort of survey. It's called a snapshot survey, where we go into the classrooms and spend time with the teachers while they're teaching to look, to observe basically the different methods that they use. That is the survey that we took, the snapshot. We used the survey from Collegiate and we modified it for Wilson.
And did you modify it just because it was a different grade level, or had you learned something from the first go-round?
We learned some things from Collegiate. However, because it was a different grade level, there were a lot of things that needed tweaked. Having gone into this particular school, there's still a lot more that needs to be done with it. One of the things that we found that we really would like to change, there was a lot of existing writing in the classroom, journals, writing on the board, collaborative pieces that were all over the place, and we couldn't take those into account on the survey itself because we didn't put anywhere to list that.
Yeah.
So
because we didn't know what we were going to encounter.
yes,
And the teachers are the students are doing a lot more writing than the teachers think they're doing.
yes,
And one of the things that we're kind of looking at now is, they are doing a lot of writing across the curriculum, but what's lacking is their intent. What intent, it's, what is it that the writing is accomplishing? And I think that's what we need to work on a little bit. And basically it's writing to learn. Writing to learn is one of the things that I think we're going to be looking at. But coming back to what was the question that you asked about changing?
changing this. Yeah, that's the thing that we would change on the survey primarily would be the making sure we had a place to put existing writing, and a few more open-ended questions I think for the instructors as well. But
and what you suggested though was that the teachers thought there was less writing going on than you observed when you went into the classrooms. What was that all about?
Well, when we first hand out the little survey for the instructors just to get their take on their program before we even look at it, there was a vast difference at Collegiate as well. Then we collect all the surveys because they also go into the classrooms and do the observations. So we collect all of that and we put that data together, and that is, you guys should have that in the Google Docs, the survey information that we have from the snapshots, the observations. It shows that there is writing across the curriculum. There is quite a bit of writing in general going on. So when we showed that data to the instructors, they were really surprised at the fact that what they thought was a concern for their program was not initially, it didn't match up. So
yeah, I think the teachers were perceiving writing as the high stakes
yes.
writing instead of, you know, the writing to learn, the writing every day in the classroom, and the math, and the science, and social studies, and language arts. And I think, you know, that's what they found out, you know, after we looked at the data, that, you know, your students are actually writing, you know,
yes.
across the curriculum. And it's not just that perception of you know, that's what we want to get,
and
you know,
in every
work on,
grade
not
level.
just high stakes writing, you know, not just writing for the test, but writing to learn across the curriculum.
So what were some of the kinds of writing that you saw going on, low stakes writing and invitations to write, that the teachers were discounting?
Journals was a huge one. They didn't count their journaling. They didn't count any of the collaborative pieces that the students were doing on the board. And they did one of those, I think, in almost every grade level every day, including kinder.
The kinder students, you know, filling in the calendar, doing their daily routine with the weather and the day and the time, and the students were, you know, they had a folder and they were writing in the day, you know, the day of the week, doing, you know, those kind of activities.
Poetry, even reflections
Poetry.
on books. They had just finished a piece when I had gotten there, and they were going through and doing reflective writing about the literature piece they'd finished, but it wasn't considered, they didn't consider that writing. And test writing, they were doing test writing on their math paper. They had a letter thing they wrote at the end of one of their math tests when I was there, and they didn't consider that either.
So what happened when you showed them the writing that they were doing?
Well, like Catherine said, we didn't have an in with this group of teachers like we did at Collegiate, and there was some resistance. They're very overwhelmed with the STEM and everything else. So there was some resistance. I think there's some exhaustion there, and the attitude changed a lot. Their receptiveness, they think they realized that, first of all, we weren't there to judge them, we were there to help them and take their ideas into account, and from there we really started to move forward with their goals and ideas.
And what were some of those? What did they decide, you know, given this new perspective on the landscape of writing in their classes? What did they decide?
Primarily that their definition of writing was fairly narrow, and that they needed to broaden it to encompass the low-stakes writing that their students are doing, and that they wanted a definition that was across the board for every grade level in their school.
And they worked on that?
They did work on it some, but we're hoping this semester we'll be doing more with them on responding to student writing, which was another thing that they had talked about, that they wanted to get better at responding to student writing as well. And then our final session with them, we will be solidifying their definition for their school, since that was one of the primary goals they set.
So what were some of the, you know, specific, I realize, I think you said that there was a kind of hiatus where the school was, you know, where teachers were preoccupied with other things that were going on with the school. What were some of the strategies that they wanted to kind of revisit? You know, strategies that they may have used earlier. That they wanted to bring into the classroom and honor.
They used to have more writing time, even school writing time. I guess at one point in time they'd done school-wide writing in the cafeteria where the students would come in early and write. Students who did, I guess, aha pieces used to be able to take them to the principal, and sometimes they would even be read over the intercom system. They used to be displayed in the hallway, in the library. The library used to have writing competition or little contest things, and they'd post them in the library. There were a lot of low-stakes opportunities, and they just, I guess with STEM and a lot of other things coming in, they went by the wayside. There wasn't time. So they're hoping to put more of that in. They're also hoping to do across the grade level collaboration more.
Well, very, very interesting. You know, teachers are hard on themselves, aren't they?
Yes.
One of the things that we found is this really helps them see where they are and not from as negative a perspective.
Yeah, high-stakes testing, you know, state mandates tend to be, you know, tend to put a filter on what we're able to see in our own classrooms with our own students. So it's it was an interesting process that they got to look with new eyes at what was actually going on in their classrooms and count what a high-stakes environment wasn't really permitting them to count.
I think it puts them back into the perspective that they are the experts in their field. And they've been told a lot lately that they aren't, and that's part of the thing that we're looking at doing.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Let's. So we've gone from Minnesota to Texas. We're going to go back to the Great White North again and ask Toby and Dan to jump in here and tell us a little bit about your work in northern Michigan. Toby, can you start us off?
I think so. Can you hear me, or am I muted?
I can hear you. You are not muted. You are loud and clear.
Yay.
And wonderful.
I'm not the techno expert that my peer mentor Dan Polleys is. So sometimes I have little techno snafus. But thank you for inviting us, Pat, because Dan and I have been collaborating for years, and it's really exciting for us to have had this opportunity with NWP to get this grant to work with Boyne Middle School. We move forward working with Boyne Middle School. They do have 50% free and reduced lunch, and so they meet the minimum requirement for the high priority school criteria. But the reason we were so inspired to work with Boyne for our first attempt at a high priority grant was that first of all, Dan, one of our stunning co-directors, is on staff at Boyne, and he's been there for years as a stellar middle school teacher. And we have two other middle school teachers that have been through our writing project on staff at Boyne Middle School. So it was really a good fit that we have those connections. The other thing is that their dynamic principal, Mike Wilson, and their high school principal, and the two of them had invited us in a year before the grant to work with the entire middle school, high school faculty on writing across their curriculum. And so that was the prelude. We'd had this relationship started where we had come in to help folks reflect on the writing they were already doing with students. What are some other possible strategies you might want to embrace, and pressing up against the notion of writing as thinking, and instead of being it something extra to layer on top of their curriculum, different ways that you embed writing to help kids understand, to negotiate meaning. So that was, we were lucky to have that relationship with Boyne Middle School. And as I was listening to Stephanie and Erin talk about their collaboration in Texas and how they had a survey, what we built on before we had our launch day in August with the entire staff at the middle school, the previous year, the middle school principal invited us to come in February and work with the entire middle school staff on metacognition and student reflection. So parts of that conversation, the notion of, what does it mean when kids reflect on their own learning and the power of that, and then looking at what kind of curriculum opportunities embrace that kind of metacognition, like project-based instruction, like portfolios. So those were, and iSearch projects. We kind of looked at a lot of different ideas for what does metacognition look like in the classroom, and what supports that. So at the end of that February day with staff, we had everybody's exit comments, and one of the questions we asked were, what strategies, what areas are you interested in diving into some more and looking at more closely. And then when we planned our August launch day for our grant, where we worked with the entire staff again, we used those feedback sheets, those exit comments, to build on. And so our grant work has had a few different tracks, but the two main tracks have been focusing with our ELA folks as experts in the teaching of writing, in learning to write, and focusing with the entire faculty on writing to learn, and how do we embed and embrace writing across the curriculum. So that was a lot. I don't know if you want me to pause here, but Dan, did you want to add anything before?
One question, as Toby and I were, kind of thinking prior to our work with the staff, and we were kind of considering or thinking about is just how can we leverage, the expertise of content area teachers and ELA teachers, and be respectful of the expertise and use that as we go forward. And I love the work of NWP. I feel like it's a model that's just so sustainable in every context, and it really helps when teachers feel that respect coming and that collegiality and the understanding that they are the expert, and we're going to be using writing as a tool for ourselves to explore our own thinking and our own understanding of our strengths as teachers and challenges, and as we look to give kids opportunities to do increased invitations for writing in our classrooms. So something.
I think one other thing I would throw out too is that Dan and I met with a variety of folks on the middle school faculty as we were writing the grant itself. And so we would have these collaborative meetings, and I did a lot of the text production, but I would take notes and go back with a draft. And so I think we really tried to honor and share ownership of the big ideas and thrust of the grant. And the principal was in on all of those meetings. He's just terrifically supportive and respectful school leader, and that's been really helpful for us too as we move forward.
So I just want to point out before we before we hear a little bit about how your sessions together were structured, that this feels in some ways like such an enviable opportunity to build on some pre-existing conversations with a faculty and administration and work that that this was fertile soil for the work that you officially began in August this year. But kind of going back to Jennifer and Maria's comments about and Catherine's about Wilson, where there wasn't a prior engagement and there wasn't a prior relationship, but that the invitation to for the teachers to name what was going on in their classrooms and to be the authorities on what was needed next. What did students need? What did they need? Seems to me to be the first step in any context, whether it's this sort of ideal, enviable Boyne Middle School where you had your TCs there and you had done work the previous year, or when you're starting out. It's the timeline is different. It starts at a different moment, but the process is a kind of similar. This co-creation, collaboration, ongoing, as Erin and Jennifer and Steph mentioned, the prompts that are always inviting teachers to be reflecting and feeding into to the work that, to the opportunities that we offer to teachers. So that's an interesting thread that runs through. So what did the sessions look like?
It's funny, from listening to what you just said, Pat, I'm thinking back to the very first launch day that Dan and I did in August with his whole, with 2/3 of the district. And we really, that model is what we've always used when we've done PD. And I was inspired by wonderful cognitive coaching mentors too. So I had to smile when I heard Stephanie and Erin talking about that, because the way you position yourself as you come to work with teachers, and I try to model that, and Dan and I both try to model this in the Summer Institute. It's, so what do we already know? What are we already doing? And, how do we celebrate and build on those strengths? And then you can turn and ask, so, by looking at what the kids are able to do, so what are the challenges that we see before us? But one of the big things that, and Dan will jump right in here, I know, but when we first met with the ELA folks in September, one of the things that we realized is we didn't have a whole lot of data for a big picture of how the kids were doing. We've got over 400 kids, grades 5 to 8. So where are their strengths and challenges in a big picture way? And maybe, Dan, do you want to jump in here about that conversation and why you decided to do a writing assessment?
Sure. Our state assessment had kind of dropped the writing portion because of the cost of scoring and all of that. So we didn't really have any data from the state. We were doing NWEA. We had a writing process score, but one of the things that troubled me as an educator of writing was the kids never actually did any writing on the test. And so we came up at a meeting and they were saying, well, here's our writing process scores. I said, well, the kids actually didn't produce any text on the assessment. So do we really have any solid data here? And that was, I think, a really big aha moment for everybody. It's like, well, wait a minute, we need to collect our own data, I guess. And so that kind of drove us into thinking about portfolio assessment and how can teachers collect data in a meaningful, scientific, powerful way that will drive instruction and enable them to help the children in their classes. So,
that's where, and we were kind of shaking our heads thinking of what Dan just said. We had no real writing, the kids don't actually write, but they give them a writing score. Give me a break. We were all just, it's like this pedagogy of the absurd. And that's a quote right from one of my mentors, Kenneth Goodman. But, in Michigan, it's just bizarro land sometimes. That folks will, they'll make these sweeping statements and we have no data. And coupled with that, all throughout the state and probably the nation, teachers are being forced to embrace multiple different evaluation plans, and they have to learn how to tell their own data story. And so that was another connection that we made. Dan is always collecting amazing data from his own classroom about what his kids are able to do. And so this was a way that we thought, well, heck, we do a September piece of writing. And I have been blessed to be invited. I was in on several scoring adventures with NWP with the scoring continuum and looking at student work with one of our mentors, Janet Swenson, and the Flint schools. And having those experiences gave me the strength to say, okay, well, I can't use the NWP writing continuum because we're not, embracing that whole notion, but we could use a 6-trait rubric and use that and a holistic rubric, and we collected samples from every kid in September, 5th through 8th grade, and then it took us, we felt like forever to come together, but that notion of scoring that student work, looking at what the kids were able to do and identifying the strengths and challenges and That was so empowering for us as teachers to be able to set and you know, we had all of a sudden, and we scored probably more than half of the papers twice because we found ourselves being way too generous sometimes because we love the kids and they're our kids. So we kept recalibrating ourselves. Yeah.
Toby, so just to clarify that the we is you and the teachers.
Yeah, all the
So
ELA
the
teachers
were all gathered together and introduced to the rubric, and then everybody read how many papers?
Right. Well, we all read 400, but we read about 200 of them more twice. So we read a lot of student papers and pressed up against, you know, what we saw as the strength holistically, and you know, what were the kids able to do? How were they with content? How were they with voice? What about their word choice and vocabulary? How about the conventions and the organization? So we looked at, you know, the basic 6 trait, which was, I think that's what the NWP continuum was based on, those basic 6 traits, and it was just a great place to start. So I'll let Dan jump in. I think he's ready to.
Oh, and I was just going to follow up with that. After we did that, we had a meeting with our content area teachers where the ELA staff took basically our rubric, the holistic rubric, and the analytical, and showed it to different content areas, and they were able to kind of bring a couple samples from math or science or social studies to look at and kind of, you know, use those tools to familiarize themselves. And I think one of the big aha moments for me in those meetings was that, you know, content, a lot, like the math teacher, I heard a math teacher say, wow, writing is a whole lot more complex than I ever thought. You know, there's a lot more that goes on. And not only that, but I think the biggest, another thing is just the metacognitive piece of how can we use writing as a tool to explore our thinking and allow students to capture, you know, understanding of complex concepts. And that I think was a thread that kind of ran through a lot of our work as far as, you know, helping model that for educators. And then the idea that the educator is a writer, a reader, a teacher, a learner, an expert, you know, ed reformer. So
what next?
Oh, that's it's a great question. Well, funny you should ask. We're in about 2 weeks, Dan. Well, the very last week in April, Dan and all of his ELA colleagues, you're doing another. We're using this. We made the prompt a little stronger, because in the interim, I got the NWP publication Wise Eyes and got some help with prompt writing. So, but we're essentially using the same prompt, and everybody's doing another piece of writing. It'll be done by May 1st. And then we're going to come in together in after-school sessions, and we're going to try to get this. We're going to try to score our focus kids, our bottom 30% papers, and get those scored and press up against that data. Because we don't think we can get all 400 pieces done, you know, after school. Everybody's pretty tired and overwhelmed with this M-step testing that's so oppressive right now. But so that's we're getting another sample and pressing up against that to see what we see as changes and differences. And also Dan lifted out when he was working with colleagues across the curriculum and sharing what we had already learned. It was great because he could show that, you know, the kids have content and voice. They've got it down, and they keep getting stronger across grade levels. But we saw some challenges with vocabulary and word choice, and we're still struggling with conventions for some of the kids. So, you know, that gives us a lens on where we go next, too. I don't know if Dan wanted to jump in. I worry about talking too much.
I think, I mean, it honestly, the process has been really amazing to go through, to have an opportunity to look at student work in a really meaningful, deep way has been really important for everyone involved. Myself,
yeah.
You know, it's been great.
Right. Well, we're also presenting to the board in May, to the school board, and the principal has already asked us to work with the ELA, to keep working with the ELA faculty next year even though our grant is over. So he wants us to continue the momentum, which is very affirming, and we really are, it's so nice to have our ELA experts valued as experts in the field of writing. They're, they want to learn more. We've already been using mentor texts and trying to fine-tune elements of our writing workshop classrooms. A lot of people will have started to identify things like, I really do need help with conferencing. That's something as kid I tell them, well, welcome to my world. We're always trying to do better at conferencing with kids, but people have been stepping up and talking about where they see the challenges of this. So many layers in this curriculum, of teaching writing. It's got to be like the most complex thing, I think, and so people are feeling, I think, more supported and definitely confident about asking to explore certain areas of their own curriculum.
Thank you. This is so rich, and I can see everybody, myself included, kind of nodding in affirmation and in recognition about this work and what you're seeing. It strikes me that among the threads that run through your work is this, and whether you articulated it up front, but it seems to me that teachers are, under incredible pressure, and that this notion of literacy and, what it means to write and to write well, in all content areas, is this sort of cloud, of where teachers don't really have an opportunity to see clearly what's at issue, not their own classrooms, not their students' work, not even the notion of what it means to write. And it seems to be that what you're all saying is that by asking teachers to reflect on aspects of this work, the question, what writing do your students do? What aspects of student writing do they do well? Just to be able to extract that information, as Toby said earlier, learning how to tell your own story. It seems so incredibly clarifying, affirming, to be able to cut through the fog and see, oh, okay, this is where we are. This is what we can build on. This is what we need to know more about and do next.
Yeah, there's so much power, Pat, in teachers telling their own data story. And we have just, I'm sure that everybody around the country deals with this too, but there's so many outside agencies and outside agendas coming down on top of us. And like you said, it makes everything so murky. And to get back to our own core, one of the things we do at MCTE in Michigan is we have a spring conference called What's Common to Your Core? And we really try to hold on to that notion of, what is best practice? And the more we can reflect on what our kids can do and the things that we've tried, it's very affirming and empowering for us as teachers, I think.
So let me, on that note, we've got a few more minutes here. Let me invite Stephanie and Erin and Jennifer and Maria and Catherine to jump in here with anything you want to speak to or affirm, or if there's anything you want to push back against. I've seen a lot of head nodding, but what did you hear and what did you notice that feels right to you or challenging?
I just have to say how much I appreciate that idea of teachers being able to tell their own data stories.
Yes.
That's hugely powerful. And it goes to this message of encouraging teacher reflective from this positive approach, not this approach where they see everything in light of testing and standards and other outside pressures, but just the ability to be able to tell their own story, that I think is really a theme of what we're trying to get at with a lot of our professional development around here. So I think that's going to be our new motto.
Yes.
So thank you.
I love that.
Wrote that down.
Yes.
Yay!
Thank you for
I do
that
have
idea.
a question. How, with your grant, did you manage to get the instructors together to grade 400 papers or so? Seriously, I would love to know.
Well, you know what we did? We met after school. We had money identified. One of the things you learn is these budgets are organic, right? So you think you're going to do one thing, and then sometimes you don't quite do that. And it's always oppressive to get subs in for the whole ELA team. So what we did was we met after school and then paid a little hourly stipend for the teachers to come together after school. We did a couple of whole days, and we just decided that this was so important for us to learn what the kids can do and to build on that, that we decided to kind of we dovetailed away from our Linda Reef book for a couple of PD days, and we just immersed ourselves and had two scoring sessions. And then we did some after-school sessions for a couple of hours, and that's, but there were like 7 of us, right, Dan? And so, we spread the wealth.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and to build that longitudinal understanding of writing was really powerful to see. Just, okay, what are we seeing in 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th and 8th? That was really powerful to be able to look at that. And, yeah.
We've looked at some existing writing, but I'd love to look at something on that level.
And I'll just jump in that one thing that was really powerful to me that you were saying that's connected to all of this is that we can be teachers who tell our own data story and our own student story at the same time, that there's multiple levels. Because I know with the teachers that we were working with, at PLC meetings, they would look at their student data and think about what was going well with their students and also areas that were, common areas across grade levels that they wanted to work towards. But then also to step back and say, but our first priority is that our students aren't afraid to put the writing on the paper, particularly with a lot of English language learner students. And so I think building a space where teachers know that it's okay to be thinking about both of those things at the same time, that there's space to do both, was really important for our teachers to understand that it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
In that way.
So we want to continue this conversation, but our webinar time is actually coming to a close. I can't thank you enough for the wise and generous sharing of the work that you're doing on the ground level in your local areas. It is so affirming to know that teachers are engaged in these deep and important inquiries, and that you're fostering reflective practice. I mean, I can just see how transformative it must be for teachers to be invited to think about and interrogate their own practice in the ways that you've all shared here. If there are any additional resources you'd like us to go ahead and add up to the program page so that when folks come back and access this on demand, they're there. I may poke you in a follow-up email, but for now we're going to sign off on the audience of participants and continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
You're welcome. Yep, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.